We are going to talk about our old friend Daniel, the YouTuber known as Hiding in My Room. And we're going to talk about Taoist philosophy. So if you have no idea who Daniel is or why I'm talking about it, if you have no interest whatsoever in the critique of the character known on the internet as Hiding in My Room, stick with the video anyway. And what I have to say about Daniel really is to lead us in a kind of investigation and reflection on the meaning of life, how to lead a meaningful life, what it means for us to be ourselves, to do what is in keeping with our own nature. I think I'm going to lead you through a series of questions about what he should do with his life on YouTube and off YouTube, real life and life as an art form and his life as a creative artist. That will be useful for you as a viewer in reflecting on your own life, what you should do with your life, even if, again, you have no idea who Daniel is, who is this mysterious figure hiding in my room. Now, you may wonder, in what way and to what extent is Taoist philosophy still a part of my own life? I'm not going to digress to talk about my own history as a philosopher and researcher who's learned many languages and studied many things, including both Buddhism and Daoism, both inside the university and outside the university, both in the Eastern world and in the Western world. I've lived in Asia for years. I've known Buddhist monks and spent time in Buddhist monasteries, and I've also spent time on the academic side. Not digressing into that. I got an email recently with the provocative title, Steroid Mazard. My family name is Mazar, M-A-Z-A-R, in case you didn't know, okay? So Steroid Mazard. So if your name were Smith, this would be like you getting an email that's titled Steroid Smith. I received this email on September 12th, 2021. Quote, Eisel, you talk a lot of smack about anabolic steroids and the users of these substances. You, a tall, burly, bald man, self-proclaimed to be hung like a horse, oozing confidence and sex appeal, who can make love up to 12 times on a good day. Ellipsis, ... Not every man is lucky enough to naturally have copious amounts of testosterone coursing through their veins. Period. New paragraph. There is a difference between use and abuse. Period. Cheers. End of email. Some of you may not believe that I actually say, some of you might think I could have never made up this email, right? If you think there's no way I lack the imagination to go. Someone wrote into me with this commentary, this question, this challenge. Okay. Now, how do you think I replied? I replied very directly, taking a page out of Taoist philosophy. So those of you who have read some Taoist philosophy in English translation, whether that's the Tao Te Ching or the Chuangzi, you will recognize the imagery and the pattern of thinking I display as follows. So this is my reply to this anonymous viewer. And as far as I know, I've never interacted with this person before. As far as I know, was never. Quote, the sparrow cannot be improved by stretching his legs longer, thinking that he ought to be a crane. Nor can the crane be improved by hunching down shorter to imitate the sparrow. An aggressive person should not seek out their self-improvement through sedatives like marijuana, etc. Nor should a sedate person try to improve themselves through stimulants. I think that each of us can be more than we are. I'm going to say that again. I think that each of us can be more than we are, but this more is achieved by working with our nature, not against it. Not medicating our nature as if it were a disability and living despite it. This is a lesson that was difficult for me to learn also. Now, I was tempted at this point in the email to really get further into that, and I'm happy to get further into that. But I will say again, this is a lesson that was difficult for me to learn also. And having learned it, that lesson can remain difficult to live with. I have the experience of having sex more than 12 times in a day. I have also the experience of living in celibacy for many years at a time. Now, we're gathered here today to talk about this cat and try to save his soul, give him some better direction, give her some better advice in life. Okay. Now, by the way, I have never identified as being hung like a horse. I'm vegan. That would be speciesism. Okay. I believe I have never compared myself to a horse in any manner or facet, neither of my personality nor my physique. I don't identify as horse-like. Anyway. Right. So that's his inference or his fantasy about me or what have you. But nevertheless, I think everyone watching this video right now, some people will be watching this video. It's the first thing they've ever seen on my YouTube channel. They're here because they know who Daniel is. They know who Hiding Memories is. Right away, they're going to pick up on a lot of differences between me and Daniel. And a lot of people would attribute those differences to testosterone. Now, I think that's kind of part of the pseudoscience and astrology of our times. There's a lot of these myths. Having a big jaw means you have high testosterone. Being bald means you have high testosterone. Having big testicles means you have high testosterone. Like, seriously, there's this whole range of things, this whole range of characteristics that my speaking voice, having a deep speaking voice, having a certain kind of confidence, that all these things relate to testosterone. I really think this is a pseudoscientific delusion in our times, that we've basically made this into like an astrological sign, that this is something like, being a Virgo, being a Taurus, being a Pisces, that we've invented a character type. And then we make inferences or claims about the supposed scientific and evolutionary basis about this character. And then I think there are many things that are kind of misleading and bad and wrong about seeing the world that way. We're not going to get into that great length here, unless if you guys in the audience are interested, you can ask me and I'll talk more about it. But you didn't know me when I was 16. I was involved in the theater. I still am. When I was involved in the theater, I was surrounded by a lot of effeminate guys. Some were gay, but some were straight men who took on the kind of mannerisms of that, working in that milieu. Now, what do I mean by that? In the same way, if you become a car salesman, you may take on the mannerisms of a car salesman from the guys you work with and what that industry is like. If you go into the army, you may take on the mannerisms. But let me tell you something. If you're in the theater, there are effeminate mannerisms. There's a way of speaking. There's a way of presenting yourself as sophisticated that you can take on. It is not hard for me to imagine how I could have developed a totally different set of mannerisms and behaviors, which have nothing to do with testosterone, right? And so I'm not going to digress with this again, unless people are interested, I'll talk more. The kind of self-confidence I have, something lacking in Hiding in My Room's YouTube channel, who he is as a person on and off camera, okay, it actually doesn't come from how much sex I have. It doesn't come from how good I am in bed. It doesn't come from my testosterone levels or my sperm count or my height or the width of my shoulders or the size of my jaw or my baldness. It's actually none of that. My self-confidence comes from leading a meaningful life, right? It really is the deep self-confidence of knowing that I have a meaningful life. And this may sound fucked up, but think it all the way through. I'm confident that I could have a meaningful life if I'm put in prison for 10 years. Okay? That's how confident I am. Now, there are guys who will bullshit you. They'll say they're not afraid to go to prison or they're not afraid to die because they think they're the toughest guy in the prison. I don't think that. I don't think are you kidding me? What prison is this? I completely assume I'm not remotely the toughest guy in the prison. I don't think I'm the smartest guy in the prison. Depends on the prison. I could, there are some prisons, but there could be people smarter than me, definitely bigger than me, stronger than me, harder working than me in the prison. There are all kinds of characters going to be in this prison. Okay. But my confidence is that I can still be leading a meaningful life in that prison. I'm still happy with myself. I'm still happy with who I am. Like, I still feel like I'm a wonderful person if I'm in prison. I get to wake up every day and be me. And I'm so positively motivated. I mean, whatever book I'm reading, I could be reading the same books in prison. Seriously, you know what I mean? That I still live that life, and that's still rewarding and positive for me to wake up every day in prison. That's the confidence I have, right? Now, even more likely, I mean, none of us know if we're going to end up in prison. It could be unfortunate in many ways. If I have to work at McDonald's, we were talking, my girlfriend and I, about the YouTuber Dax Flame. If you don't know who Dax Flame is, don't Google it. You'll be disappointed. Dax Flame, of course, is very unhappy about working in an ice cream shop, scooping ice cream and serving ice cream. I could be happy working in an ice cream shop, going to prison. I'm living a meaningful life. I know in this pragmatic sense, I know what the meaning of life is, meaning I know how to live a meaningful life. And that's the confidence I carry with me everywhere. Okay. Now look, guys, there's always somebody with a bigger dick than you. Okay. Objectively. All right. And there's always somebody who, for this particular woman, would be better in bed than you, right? That's not objective. That's subjective. Different women like different things. My girlfriend and I, Melissa, we're so compatible. It's one of the reasons I'm not jealous. It's very different it's very difficult to imagine any other man being more compatible with her than I am and giving her more orgasms per hour than I do. Like we really are a match. But that's subjective. If you're going to have experience with a lot of women, 10 women, like let's say in your whole life, you sleep with 10 women. No matter how confident you are that you are objectively good in bed, subjectively, you're not going to be good for all those women. There are women who are going to be into things, whether you think of that as a fetish, it doesn't matter. Whether, however you think of it. There are women where what they enjoy about sex is not what you want to do about sex. There are women who, like, if you sleep with enough women, no matter how good you are in bed, there are women who are going to be disappointed in you. And they may just frown, they may cry, they may mock you and ridicule you, right? When I go into the bedroom with a woman, say I go into bedroom with a woman who's a complete stranger, I have no sexual history, it's the first time sleeping with a woman, okay? My confidence is not built on the fact that I'm great in bed, right? And like I am, but I don't like peeing on people. Like, I don't like, there's all kinds of crazy stuff women are into that I'm not into, right? You know what I mean? Like, I can claim I'm great in bed objectively, right? If you sleep with enough women, sooner or later, you're going to get with this chick and she's into peeing. She's into whatever she's into. She's turned on by feet or whatever her thing is. Something she likes, whether it's mainstream or obscure, that you don't fit, whether that's physically, psychologically, in terms of technique, right? In terms of what, sooner or later, you're going to get with the woman who laughs at you, right? Or you're going to get the woman who weeps, or it's bad one way or another. Okay. So what does your self-confidence come from? You see what I'm saying? It can't be based on the fact that you're great in bed, that you're great at sex, right? So now I've used this as an example because it's easy for people to relate to, and there's a very clear element of fear, all right? But I could transfer this to totally non-sexual example. Briefly digress, give you another one. You'll see this. This applies to everything in life, okay? I am an incredibly talented language teacher. I can teach you English. I can teach you Chinese. I can teach you Laotian. I can teach you languages I don't know that much of. Like, I could probably do a really good job of teaching you the basics of like Korean Ojibwe, even though I only studied that for like 2 semesters or something. Like, I only have this very rudimentary ability, but I'm an incredibly talented language teacher. Melissa and I were talking to someone recently over Skype, and she was saying, look, Eisel, you are so great at this. I was basically teaching her English, just in passing, just very casually. Well, not as a job, but, she said, look, you really need to do this as your career, or you need to do this on YouTube. Like, you're so great at teaching language. This is someone who could appreciate it, right? Now, I can sit here and say to you, like, objectively, like as if it's an objectively real fact, that I'm a great teacher, specifically that I'm a great language teacher, that I'm great at explaining linguistic concepts, right? But it's the same shit as I was just saying about sexuality. Because the reality is there's a kind of compatibility necessary between the teacher and the student. And not every student can appreciate what it is I'm doing. And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students. So I know that. One really briefly, there was this one girl who came into my class. This was in Cambodia, but I had almost the exact same thing happen with two girls in Yunnan in China. There was one girl who came in Cambodia, and I'm doing this, like no offense, but in some ways, I mean, I didn't meet every teacher at that school, but I think I was the best teacher in that school, in that university. I was teaching university level. I think I was the best language teacher, English teacher in that university. And, you can tell I have this great theatrical style, and I really reach out to the students, and I'm really making eye contact, and really talking with them, and really doing the language work, and I'm really prepared, and I really understand what I'm teaching. And I understand their language. They were always shocked. I could explain, because I knew Pali, I knew the ancient liturgical language. I knew how to explain English grammar using Cambodian grammar, because Cambodian grammar is from Pali. They were shocked at that. They were really impressive. Whoa. And so no other teacher could do that, could go into this kind of ancient Cambodian to explain to a modern Cambodian. So there's all this stuff I could do so well. And there's this sulky little girl she's a college student, but she was a really small, young looking university student. She was sitting there and, not looking at me, and she's sullen. She doesn't like the class. She doesn't like the teacher. I forget what I said to her. I said to her something like, "Oh, how'd you like class that? You didn't participate much. Like you did that. You should take it." Because, some of the students some of them are getting involved and getting the most of the class. She's sitting there sulking, and she holds up for me a crossword puzzle. She said, "I did this crossword puzzle like in class that day." She says, "This is what we should do every class, every day. You should do crossword puzzle. And then you should correct them and give them back to." Woo! What a philosophy of education! This is your idea of what a good teacher is, right? So, okay. The point is, I can sit here in front, right? Like I'm an objectively good language teacher, and I can sit here in front like I'm objectively good in bed. And there's a sense in which it's true. There's a sense in which we can say objectively what is and isn't a good English teacher, what isn't being bed, right? But I know what we're talking about as objectively real is actually intersubjectively real, okay? Bread does not taste good objectively. Bread tastes good for a human being who has a hungry stomach. It's relative to how hungry you are, as well as the subjective judgment of your mouth, your mind, your cultural background. What is and isn't delicious bread? Bread can't be delicious in and of itself, right? So when I go into that situation, why is it that I'm so confident, simultaneously knowing that I'm great in bed and individual people will not be compatible with me and will subjectively feel that I'm bad at it? I feel I'm a great teacher, but specific students will not be compatible with my teaching style, or just not appreciate it, will not benefit from it, and they may be mopey, and they may be morose, and they may even denounce me as a bad teacher or whatever, right? Why is it? Because I'm going in not with the confidence that I'm going to satisfy you, and not with the confidence that you are going to be compatible with me. It's that I'm leading a meaningful life anyway, and I don't need you, bitch. Like, you've got nothing to add to my life, and there's nothing you can take away from it. I'm happy if I go to jail. I'm happy if I got to work at McDonald's. I'm happy scooping ice cream at an ice cream shop. Whatever. Like, I'm happy alone. Like I'm happy if I'm single, if we're talking romantically. I'm happy if I have no student. You know what I mean? Like, my confidence doesn't rely on other people in that. You see? Now, again, we used a sexy example and a non-sexy example. You can extend this to playing music, art, making. There's a lot of stuff you can apply this to. But obviously, we're partly talking about someone's love life here, right? Talking about Daniel. Okay, guys, I'm seeing your questions come in. I just at this moment I don't want to digress, but if you're talking about something on topic, I'm interested to see what you guys have to say. Okay, so look, coming back to this question from the audience that I already read out. All right, so this guy is writing into me and saying that I'm opposed to people taking steroids, which I am. So, I'm a critic of the steroid culture. I'm a critic of people getting into testosterone boosting drugs, steroids, performance enhancing drugs of various kinds. And this guy is writing to me saying that basically It's unfair for me to say this because allegedly, presumably, supposedly, I already have these advantages that I personally don't need testosterone booster. I don't need steroids. So who am I to judge? Who am I to complain? And he closes by saying, he says explicitly, not every man is lucky enough to naturally have copious amounts of testosterone. And then he goes on to say there's a difference between use and abuse, right? And he's saying that I'm in this privileged position where I don't need these drugs, but other people do, right? So then think about the answer I'm giving back and think about what I've just explained to you now. I say back to him, no, the sparrow cannot be improved by stretching his legs longer, thinking that he ought to be a crane, nor can the crane be improved by hunching down shorter to imitate the sparrow. An aggressive person should not seek out their self-improvement through sedatives like marijuana, nor should a sedate person try to improve themselves through stimulants. All right? Each of us can be more than we are, but this more is achieved by working with our nature, not against it, not medicating our nature as if it were a disability and living despite it. Okay, so I'll read through some of these comments now. Obviously, I have more to say, and if you guys don't already know, title of the video, you know what it is. Ultimately, I'm coming back to here while we're having this philosophical discussion about Daoism in my life and in your lives. Also, I hope we got 21 people in the audience. It would help me. Oh, now 22. Help me if you guys would hit thumbs up so that we have 22 thumbs up with 22 people, and more people will join the crowd, and more people will say interesting and possibly offensive things in my comment section to drive the conversation further. Okay, so here is Nacho who asks a question. Quote, Eisel, would you really be happy working for, hold on one sec. Would you really be happy working for a company that sells dairy products? So you might as well dairy products, meat products, or what have you, anything like this. So, Nacho, I think you're a relatively recent fan of the channel. It's a turning point in my life, but I got to tell you, I really had to think about, would I be happy in the army or not? Would I be happy fighting maybe an unjust war, or maybe fighting a war where I sympathize with the objectives, but I feel it's being fought by unjust means? So, I am at a stage in my life where I can join the army and fight for the American side in Afghanistan or any of these examples. I mean, the war I signed up to fight in was the war against ISIS. And we can engage in a critique of all kinds of things. But, that involves killing people, and it may involve you personally getting shot or injured. I mean, in America's wars today, it's very unlikely you'll die. Some American soldiers die, but, more likely that you'll be injured and maimed. You'll be impacted in that way. And I'm telling you, I can be happy doing that. I'm telling you, I can be happy going to prison. So yes, I am saying I can be happy doing something that's as odiously immoral and in various ways kind of exploitative. I am saying that. And that's because of who I am now and what I carry with me. And implicitly something I'm saying, because I mentioned this before on my YouTube channel, so I won't say it like that would not have been true of me at 18 years old or 16 years old. It would have really shaken me to my core to be doing something immoral and challenge, and to wake up and look at my own hands and look at the mirror and say, is this who I really am? And is this all I am? Is this who I am? Am I this killer? Am I this person who kills for the army? Am I this person who gets shouted at and follows orders I don't understand? Like the way your sense of self changes if you're 16 or 18 in the army, or if you're 16 or 18 and working at McDonald's or something. Some of these, I do think that really impacts me. I do. And I've talked about the example also. I've known a lot of women who worked as bartenders and waitresses. And I think that some 16, 18, 21, and I think it really does impact them. But no, for me now, and why? Because I didn't have that self-confidence then. I didn't have that meaningful life, so on and so forth, Yeah. So Joshua Lay, I see you're making an intelligent point, but the wording is not so intelligent. So Joshua says, quote, then it would be an objective stance taken off of a trend of being a good teacher or a good lover with slight outliers. So what Joshua is saying is you can talk about being an objectively good teacher or objectively good in bed, because by talking about a trend line or an average, a trend is not quite the same as an average. Calculating a trend line on the chart and then just dealing with outliers. What if you're an Elvis impersonator and you live in a country where nobody knows who Elvis is? Okay, so I'm actually taking a more radical nihilistic position than you, Josh. I don't think how good a teacher you are can be arrived at through an average of wrong answers. And I don't, like, I know this is going to sound weird. There's a sense in which how good a musician you are can't be arrived at through an average of wrong answers, because how good an Elvis impersonator you are can't be arrived at that way either. There has to be some other criterion for what is a meaningful life and what does it really mean to be an Elvis impersonator. As crazy as that may sound, where you really understand the art form and you really understand what you're doing and you understand your own excellence in this, even if you live somewhere where nobody else can appreciate how you've captured the warbling in Elvis's voice, or what it is you're getting across emotionally or intellectually in your art. So I don't think you can come to a simple objective standard. And guys, again, I'm saying this for a reason. This is not chalkboard philosophy. I'm not saying this to get the theorem right on the chalkboard. I'm saying this because some of you have ears to hear and you know this is meaningful in your own lives. Some of you are writing a book and nobody appreciates it. Not even your own wife or your own girlfriend. Some of you are working on some project. It may be a business. It may be a book. It may be, it may be music. And you don't have anyone in your life who appreciates it. Your own parents don't understand it and don't approve of it. And you have to make these kinds of decisions. They're high stakes decisions, even if there's no money involved. They're decisions that affect, so many years of your life in such a deep way, and I'm saying to you, no, you can't, even if it is something as simple as being a teacher. You're a teacher. Let's say you teach sign language and your students all hate you. This really may be your experience. You have these asshole students who don't appreciate what you're trying to do as a teacher of sign language. You got to start asking yourself really tough questions. And maybe you're a bad teacher. Maybe you are. Maybe you're a bad Elvis impersonator. Maybe you're a bad artist. I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm not. But I'm pointing out just how deep and difficult this kind of evaluation is, right? Like, I got fan mail recently from a couple people saying that I'm an excellent teacher of economics. They really appreciate when I talk about the stock market or when I talk about economic and political problems. Okay. Do you think it would be an easy decision for me to make, like even on the basis of this fan mail, because whatever, a couple thousand people watch my videos, and for me to make that decision to devote my life to that area of study and that area of teaching, obviously, like the positive feedback can be misleading also, right? The point is you could have negative feedback. You're trying to teach sign language. None of these kids appreciate what you're doing. You're trying to teach something, whatever it is, but you can also have positive feedback that's misleading. So yeah, it's deeper and more difficult than that. The average of wrong answers is simply another wrong answer. So it's hard. All right. So XYZ Media says, so welcome to the crowd, XYZ, but I don't recall you ever being in the audience before. It's a name I don't remember. So he writes in, quote, "This may offend you, but from what I've seen, I believe you are." So you got a grammatical error here. You got a spelling error. I don't know if English is your first language. "I believe you are using meaningfulness as a mask for some level of narcissism. I want to see more videos of you openly criticizing yourself and your faults." Okay. So fair, but one, there already are YouTube videos on my channel doing that. There are plenty of videos talking about me and my faults. But what you will find also as you watch more of my videos is that it's normally in exactly these same videos that I'm talking about it. Because whenever I talk about leading a meaningful life, I talk about all the disadvantages of leading a meaningful life. I talk about the tremendous sorrow, the tremendous suffering, the tremendous disadvantages that come with it. With the path I took myself, I talk so much about regrets. You can just search my channel for the word regret. Okay, but here's what I have to say to you, XYZ Media. Okay. How would you feel if you had grown up in Papua New Guinea? You had no access to radio. You had no access to television. You grew up on a remote island in Papua New Guinea, fishing with your father and grandfather, climbing up and down trees and weaving baskets out of rattan. Okay? And then you see a man who comes to your island and sets up a stage and starts impersonating Elvis, starts singing and dancing the songs of Elvis Presley. You might think this is narcissism. In your own cultural idiom, you might think this is just this man's ego. This man is a crazy narcissist to dress up in these strange clothes and have his hair in this strange way and sing this strange song. It's all it is to you is strange, but you're not actually measuring his narcissism. You're just measuring the depths of your own shallow incomprehension. You can't comprehend who he is or what he's doing or why it's meaningful or what it's significant. What its significance is, and what its emotional significance for the audience that does appreciate. There's an audience that appreciates that and has some emotional meaning, these particular songs, these memories of Elvis and this imitation. And you can't appreciate the humility that's involved, that it's actually not narcissism, right? Because what he's doing is, on the one hand, for his audience, and on the other hand, it is for the memory of Elvis Presley, that there's a mark he's working towards, right? So I understand what you're saying here, right? But all I get from your statement, is your admission of your own ignorance. Now, I'm going to contextualize this. I made videos talking about Buddhist philosophy in the past, a whole bunch of them. I don't know how many. I don't know if there were 20 or 100. I've made a lot of videos talking about Buddhist philosophy. Other people, including other YouTubers like Unnatural Vegan, they responded to that as if it was egomania, not narcissism strictly, but as if like I'm on some ego trip, right? Why? Because they have no comprehension whatsoever of what I'm doing, what I'm talking about, or what extreme humility is actually involved in what I'm doing. What I'm doing for the audience, like in this moment, and talking about my life as a scholar of Buddhism, right? It involves a lot of humility and even humiliation. I mean that, it really does. Saying, look, when I went to live in Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia, these were my misconceptions. This is what I was ignorant about. This is what I was trying to do when I learned it was impossible. When I first got involved with Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy, these were my youthful, ignorant assumptions. And then I learned how wrong it was. There's a lot of humility. There's a lot of humiliation. They can't understand that. They look at that and they see narcissism. They look at that and they see egomania. They look at that and they see boasting. They're so dumb. They're so ignorant and they're so fragile in their own sense of ego that all they can hear is, this is a guy boasting that he used to live in Cambodia. This is a guy boasting that he's an expert about Buddhist philosophy. Okay, well, fuck you. I did live in Cambodia. I am an expert in Buddhist philosophy. And if you weren't such a self-centered, self-centered, shallow, ignorant person, right? You would realize that what I'm explaining to you is precisely the regrets I have in life, the mistakes I made, that you're asking for me to criticize myself, talking about faults. And that's what I am doing. And you're so ignorant. You're so incapable of understanding what I'm saying that you're misperceiving that self-criticism as if it were boasting, as if it were narcissism, right? And let me say, this is what I have to share, okay? I went to Cambodia with good intentions. I went to Laos with good intentions, okay? And I've come back with regrets. And I'm saying to the audience, don't make the same mistakes I made. And if you stick with this video, you're going to see a lot of what I have to say is, don't make the mistakes I made. And if you see that as narcissism, what does that say about you? All right. How many people in this crowd grew up going to church? How many of you actually literally grew up with sermons? It may be zero. Like it may be all of you grew up more or less atheist or just in a family that was only nominally religious and didn't take you to church. Compare what I'm doing now to any sermon you've ever heard in a church, from a priest, from a pastor, in a synagogue, from a rabbi, from a Muslim cleric. All right. If you really can't pick up on the extent to which I'm criticizing myself, right, that just tells me something about you. if you can't pick up on the extent to which I'm really regretting decisions that I'm sharing with you, those mistakes, this is not what you hear from authority figures, from men of faith. It's not. And I understand aesthetically, it may resemble a sermon, but there's a really deep difference here. Pardon me. So I'm just catching up with your comments there, guys, and then I'll get back to the topic of the video. I'd say, sorry, babe, I don't know if it's on your mind or not. Melissa's off camera. When I'm saying babe, I'm not addressing the audience. Babe, I don't know, but that friend you had from college who, sent you a bunch of insane, really kind of insane and insulting messages on Facebook that time. People who knew you in the past. I think what I just described now, I think that really is that same kind of thing. I mean, it's just totally failing to understand the content of what I'm doing in these YouTube videos and just responding to the container, and what is the container? They're responding. It's really like the mental level of like a 6-year-old. Like, oh, you think you're important because you have the self-confidence to make a video talking about the politics of Bernie Sanders or, whatever it is that's on my YouTube channel at that time, and it's like, and they can just respond to that as if it's narcissism, and they can't even watch the video and see, hey, this is someone who actually has the humility to take the time to read Bernie Sanders' book and take notes and then talk to you in the audience kind of chapter by chapter. Like, that's what I'm doing. That is actually humility. It's not egomania. It's like, well, look, this is my background. I've studied politics for so many years. Actually, I have a university degree in politics. Now I'm going to take the time to share with you my thoughts after reading this book. There's a lot of humility in it, and there's a lot of humiliation and opening yourself up to it. I'm just saying, but they're kind of just responding to that on the outside, and they fear it as some kind of egomania. Yeah.
I don't want to derail the conversation too much, but my response to that is, I think culturally, at least where I grew up, that humility is confused with veneration, that you couldn't possibly criticize Bernie Sanders. Like that isn't, that doesn't relate to humility.
Right.
People will say like, well, if you're a humble person, you will look up to other people and, speak positively rather than speaking critically.
Okay.
It's a very shallow view of that.
I understand. Yeah.
I think it's better to be critical and
I think though what I'm saying is that woman you knew in college who got in touch with you and those types of people, I don't even think there's that much thought put into it.
No,
but I would point out, it doesn't matter. So if I were doing movie reviews, it doesn't matter if it's a positive movie review or a negative movie review. The response is at this 6-year-old level.
Yeah, like, who do you think you are, man?
Yes. Who do you think you are to make a movie review at all?
Yeah.
You must be an egomaniac. You must be a narcissist. And the reality is, no, like, dude, I do a lot of work. I do this with very little paid back to me for it. So, like, no, this is actually this kind of very humble labor compared to what you do in your job 9 to 5. And there's very little, honor or dignity in it. So I understand that. Yeah. That's what I say. So I was just disagreeing with you on that level. Is that like I don't even think it's about whether I'm praising Bernie Sanders or criticizing him. It's just that you dare. Yeah, and they wouldn't, and that's and a lot of complex feelings of inferiority come out of that. Okay, so just catching up with your comments, then we will get back to the hero of our story here. Okay, so Vanima is back in the audience. Vanima, can I just ask you to rephrase your question? You're asking something about learning Chinese, but I don't know what you're asking. So I don't mind. It's off topic, but whatever you have to say, say it. So Vanima, anyway, look, I don't even want to digress in this. Vanima, I don't know how long you've been watching the channel, but I don't know why you would come here and ask me to enable comments in the videos. You're commenting to me right now. You're not paying me $1, and I'm not making one dime out of this. And I'm taking the time to talk to you, even though you have not taken the time to write your question in correct English, frankly. Now, I also know Vanima has mentioned that she is a very young person. I don't know if you're 18 years old or what. That's why I assume your comments are poorly written. But if you've looked at any one video on my channel for more than the last year, it says in the description, if you want to know why comments are disabled on my channel, here is the answer in a relatively uplifting 5-minute video. And then there's the link. So, what is it you can't deal with here? Okay, Vanima, do you want to ask me now or no? I'm ready to move on. But I don't see how anyone can participate in this conversation if it's not the first time stumbling on my channel. You don't know the answer to that question. You don't know why it is. Okay. This is the problem. Guys, this makes me feel like not answering the questions at all. Vanima, how many years experience do you have as a YouTuber? How many years experience do I have? What do you think you're going to teach me? This is just a joke. I'm so glad you came to my audience and think that you know better than me about something. What have I made now? 3,000 YouTube videos, more than 5 million views in like 7-8 years or something. I really just have zero respect for someone. I don't show up at your workplace and tell you what to do. Okay, I mean, I really just don't understand how you can enter into a conversation that insincerely and with that expectation. All right. Anyway, and as I say, you were complaining about this at a time when I'm right now stopping what I want to do. I'm taking the time out to speak to you one-on-one, and you still have no respect for it. So, as 50 Cent used to say, respect or check it. So yeah, James says he ain't got time for that. Anyway, sorry. It's just, it's one of those things. I've spoken so much and lately about the philosophy of being a YouTuber and the ways in which this is rewarding, and this is related to hiding in my room. So if you guys don't know, if you check his channel right now, if you just look at the list of video titles, he's talking about deleting his YouTube channel. So this is a good segue. He's talking about giving up on YouTube forever, and he's talking about the ways in which YouTube has destroyed his life. So I have lately made many videos, philosophizing about this. And any idiot could see the extent to which YouTube has destroyed my life. Any idiot could glance around and say, this comes with a really serious cost. There were really, really serious sacrifices and really serious disadvantages. I've lately said, this brings us back to hiding in my room in a big way. It's a lot like making the decision to appear in pornography. If you're going to start making pornographic videos, you get a lot of judgment, you get a lot of abuse, you get a lot of really negative harassment and distractions that come into your life. And it's, there's a lot of heartache, there's a lot of disappointment, there's a real cost that comes with the decision to be a YouTuber, but above and beyond that, I mean, what I'm interested in doing, what I'm willing to set aside time to do, is to have really meaningful connections with real people who are using their real names and their real faces on the internet and taking real risks, and who are motivated to do real things. To paraphrase the rapper Notorious B.I.G., real people do real things. So Vanima, I'm going to give you a contrast to yourself. I had a guy write to me recently at length who was drafting a letter to present to a judge in what you could call a human rights court case in the United States of America. Now, this guy, he has good intentions, and politically, he's trying to make the world a better place, but he does not have my educational background in politics. He also hasn't obsessed over politics for decades of his life. I mean, most of my education is informal and so on and so forth. You know what I mean? And so this guy, who I have spent a couple hours talking to and interacting with, I took the time and I said, okay, look, here's my feedback on how I think you should rewrite this letter to the judge. And he did thank me. He really appreciated the feedback I gave, although I didn't have as much time as I might like. I don't have so many hours. I only have so many hours in the day. But anyway, and then he wrote back to me later and said that he had taken the revisions and presented them to the judge, and that his statement to the judge had been accepted and added to the record, and it'll have its little bit of political impact. Okay. Now, why did I ever get on YouTube? Why did I start talking about vegan politics or any kind of politics? I'm willing to take several hours to talk to a person like that and help a person like that. I don't think I've made $1 out of that. And maybe I'm wrong, because I think he does support me on Patreon for $1 a month. It's not, and by the way, I also get no fame. It's a totally anonymous form of participating in politics. I'm willing to take the time to help real people doing real things to improve their own lives, to improve the lives of others. That's the kind of generosity of spirit I've got. And I come out here on camera and, again and again. And my generosity is basically never rewarded by people like you in the audience. I mean, it's really close to 100% negative experiences. So, for someone like you to come in the audience and say, oh, well, why don't you spend 10 hours a week moderating and replying to a YouTube comment section? And you may not know how many hours a week it is. I do. I have years and years of experience. Why don't you take time responding to basically sexual harassment from thousands of anonymous people? And sometimes it's anti-Semitic harassment. I get that too. Sometimes it's political harassment from people who are neo-Nazis, from people who are communists. Sometimes it's just from people who are incredibly stupid vegans who, intensely. I've endured that for years, and I'm still out here trying. I said before that if you want to do this kind of thing, this does relate to, on a deep level, relates to hiding in my room. This should have been the title of the video or something. If you want to do YouTube, you have to be willing to get your heart broken again and again, and get up the next day and say, okay, now I'm going to do it again. I'm going to have my heart broken again. And my whole experience with vegan activism and political activism, it's been heartbreaking. It's been nothing but disappointment. There's not one positive counterexample. It's been heartbreaking again and again and again. And no offense, but you people disappointed me. It's not Daniel that let me down. It is you people in the audience who let me down again and again, including with my very, very humble aspirations to do things like organizing a conference related to, it was a specific issue in veganism as a political movement, and then collect the conference papers and publish it as a book. There were very specific kind of intellectual activist things I wanted to do. There were things I offered to do to help other people. And when I needed help, nobody helped me. That's my experience, okay? But I'm still out here. I'm still out here getting my heart broken. I'm still here offering to help people, and it just, it's just awful to have to face this again and again, where people expect me to be pouring time into crap like moderating comment sessions and dealing with the same stupid, hostile, ill-intentioned questions again and again. So it's going to be people asking the same questions about eating meat. It's going to be people asking the same questions about me being a Jew. Like, really, like a huge percentage of all the messages I've ever gotten are anti-Semitism, guys. I know you haven't, it's going to be the same questions about something another mean-spirited YouTuber made up about my relationship with my ex-wife or my daughter or my mom again and again and again. Okay, that's what you're asking me to take the time to deal with, and to get nothing. Nothing in return, ever. So, that's what you're asking when you ask that kind of thing. Okay. Anyway, look, so what I do is not for everybody. And also, so Vanima, if you're watching, you could say I gave you a chance because, you and I've talked in the past. I mean, you've made some intelligent contributions in the past, but you can see what a really depressing effect your comment has had on me and how it's really derailed this live stream. So, thanks for nothing. I mean, I really would have appreciated it if you could have said something positive or, contributed to the conversation and spoken on topic instead of doing what you've done. Because it's derailed this into a really dark, really dark and depressing, dead end, where now I'm supposed to gather up my sense of energy and motivation and return to the topic of this video. Okay. Now, maybe it's a good segue anyway. Okay, because what I wanted to talk about today was this guy, Daniel, and his decision to give up on YouTube. And what makes it an interesting example? So we have just alluded to actually a lot of the stuff Daniel has had to endure. So yeah, I've just been talking about the extent to which I have to deal with constant abuse from the audience or what have you. And at different times, sometimes it's more anti-Semitism, and sometimes it's more crazy communists or what have you. And sometimes it's more crazy raw fruitarian vegans. There is no doubt that Daniel is a guy who has to endure a great deal of abuse from his audience also. So I alluded to the fact that people send me hate mail about my divorce from my ex-wife. That's a good comparison. I am sure Daniel gets much more intense, much more ridiculous and abusive hate mail about his divorce from his ex-wife. His ex-wife was with him on YouTube. Today, she does in fact have her own YouTube channel. And on another person's YouTube channel, she uploaded interviews talking about how horrible their marriage was. So there was a lot of gossip around that. So, dude, I can relate. In effect, I went through my own divorce on YouTube, although my ex-wife never started her own YouTube channel. She was probably tempted at some point. But I have had divorce drama, and I've had that kind of maelstrom of innuendo against me on the internet before. I understand how he has now come to a point where he looks back at his life. He feels that YouTube has ruined it and that he would be a better person if he just deleted YouTube entirely from his life. Or what he's currently proposing as a middle path, that he deletes all of his past videos that made him successful and made him popular. And instead takes on a kind of phony and almost anonymous identity on YouTube of making a kind of clean, respectable pablum content, a sort of a neutral, more professional and respectable content. Okay, so look, guys, sorry, you can see I'm trying to speak on topic. I just don't know why. I mean, what's the point of trying to derail the conversation this way? So, I'd appreciate it if you're going to participate in the conversation, try to speak on my level, try to speak on topic, try to contribute to the video in a positive way. Otherwise, I just don't see the point of having the audience participate at all. Yeah, and here's someone from the audience agreeing with me. He says, I get the whole comments are turned off thing. Well, anyway, sorry, I made a different video talking about this, but it's true. There's more than one approach to YouTube. One approach you can have to YouTube is have the comments open and really put in the time every day to reach out to people and thank them and encourage them and gossip with them. And I can remember, I've tried all this stuff, but let's put it this way. If you are the kind of person who, while you are working out at the gym, wants to pause between every exercise and check your comment section and go through and delete things and reply to things, you want to have this kind of constant chatter with, strangers who, strangers who know nothing about you and care nothing about you. So this for a certain kind of personality, if that's what you want in your life, you can go ahead and do it. And of course, there are people who hire staff to pretend to be them and farm their compensation this way. But anyway, it's certainly, I mean, it's, you wouldn't have a conversation with people in a cafe this way. You wouldn't talk to strangers on the street or in a coffee shop this way. So, I do expect people in my audience to step up to that same level and talk to me the same way you would in a coffee shop. And I do expect people in a coffee shop to speak on topic and on the same level, not to just raise something totally, just say, I mean, it's within that same remit, Whew, great question. Who is hiding in the room? So good. Good question. Yeah, and Sam says, so this is on topic. I wonder if Daniel will actually stick to it. Anissian repeatedly promises to delete his channel and quit YouTube, and it doesn't follow through with his own proclamations. Right. Okay. I do think it's a little bit deeper and a little bit more interesting what's going on with hiding in my room this way. As follows. So the point is this. Who is this guy, Daniel, who is hiding in my room? He doesn't sing. He doesn't dance. He doesn't even really tell jokes, right? His act is honesty. The one thing he's got going for him, the one thing he really does that brings in crowds and entertains people and makes his channel unique and distinctive and always has, is a kind of confrontational honesty. Often it seems like a sort of just totally uninhibited, childlike honesty, where it hasn't even occurred to him to conceal the things that everyone else would conceal. It hasn't occurred to him to be indirect rather than direct about things. He has a bluntness and honesty in dealing with his own life, which is the entire basis of his fame, and it's everything his audience appreciates about him. Now, do I find that honesty shocking? Do I find it offensive? Yes, but it's meaningful because it's not an act. He's not a stand-up comic. He's not pretending to be honest with things. It's his real life, and he's really honest about it. I mean, he used to make videos. I think all of them are now deleted from his channel. He used to make videos talking about his own psychology and cheating on his wife and why he doesn't feel bad about cheating on his wife, and including sleeping with prostitutes when he was cheating on his wife. And those videos, they are 100% the honest perspective of a man who chooses to live that way. And like, in a sense, it's priceless. Who else would say this stuff? Who else would share it with you? Like, I think most men who live that way and who feel the way he feels, they would never tell their best friend this. They would never tell their closest friends, or they definitely would never tell their own parents. They definitely would never tell their own wife. Like, this is how they feel about it. This is how they rationalize it in their own mind. This is, this is how they assume other men feel, and so on. You get his whole Weltanschauung. You get his whole worldview. You get his pragmatic philosophy, and you get to feel that. You get to see through his eyes. And to some extent, the audience does benefit. It does have some educational value because you get to learn from his mistakes. You also get to see his agony. So look, his work on the stock market, it's actually an interesting example that confirms this. So when he first started making videos about the stock market, I kind of had to wince and grit my teeth. I really disliked his early videos but he was making them very honestly and sincerely. He was in a period of totally reckless optimism that he was going to become a millionaire by trading stocks on the stock market. But just a few months later, he starts to figure out that he doesn't really understand how the stock market works, that his strategy that he thought was it was a can't fail strategy. It was a certain to succeed strategy that actually, not only does he recognize the extent to which he was wrong, but many of the people he idealized and followed as stock market gurus, that their advice was bad and that was wrong. He starts to understand how the stock market works. Oh, so again, now already, just by sheer dint of his honesty, he's doing something really valuable and really meaningful with YouTube. And you couldn't pay for that. Like, you could not pay someone to, again, most people, even with their closest friend at a bar, like a man who sits down with his closest friend drinking beer, would never reflect on his own high hopes and aspirations when he first got involved in the stock market, and then how he was disillusioned, how he ended up losing all of the money he gained, and what his motivations were. And this is exactly the dude who does that. This is the one guy in a million who has this, again, in some ways, very childlike lack of inhibition. And in some ways, I think it's a kind of adult commitment to really being rigorously honest, dangerously honest in talking about his love life, his marriage, his divorce, so on and so forth, but down to and including this fantasy he had that he would stop doing YouTube entirely because he would just be such a huge success on the stock market. And then the reflections where he has the honesty to put up how much money he's lost. So now, by contrast, there's a YouTube channel I really intensely hate, called Brian Turner Invests, and he is exactly dishonest in all the ways Hiding My Room is honest. If you follow me on Patreon, you'll see I've actually posted some charts where it's like, well, he predicted this stock would at least triple in value, and instead it's now at 50% of its value when he made that prediction. Like, look at it. And there's no reflection. He just hypes these things and promotes himself and presents himself as an expert. And then you don't get the doubt and self-examination and self-analysis, right? Okay, so you guys can tell, even though this is somebody I kind of morally disapprove of in various ways, I wouldn't make the same choices he makes in his life. This quality of searing honesty, right? That is his act, right? That's not just one aspect of it. That's the whole value of what he did on YouTube and what he had to contribute. So it's equally disturbing to hear him say that he wants to delete his YouTube channel and give up on it. It's equally disturbing for him to threaten that, and it's as it is for him to threaten that he's just now going to become another phony, shallow, pablum YouTube channel. He said he's going to do like Yeah, travel videos like, oh, I climbed a mountain in Japan. I went to the hot springs, tour of Osaka or something. Like he's going to give a walking tour of some neighborhood in Osaka. So that is very different. I'll come back and look at the comment section, guys. That is very different from someone like Anissian, whose strength was in doing narrative, scripted, fictional comedy videos, or singing and dancing videos, or what have you. Right. So Joshua Lay says, quote, so by the way, I think this is an intelligent comment, so I'm responding to it. Joshua Lay, who I don't know, by the way. Welcome to the crowd, Josh. I don't remember your name. I think I would. Anyway, Joshua Lay says, quote, I completely understand why you wouldn't want to open up to those kinds of people in the comments, but it helps those of us who wish to do mental battle in the comment section and challenge opposition. He then says, but I get it. Right. Josh, I just say this honestly. I think a lot of people are bringing onto the internet attitudes that they cultivated sitting at the dinner table with their own parents, and what I have to say to you is fighting is not learning, and fighting is not teaching. So I get what you're talking about here. And I've never been a host to that in my own YouTube channel. I've never hosted that when I had a Discord, which I don't anymore. I've never hosted that. I think that a lot of people learn to fight with their parents. That's the main way they learn to talk. They see their parents fighting and they fight with their parents. And there is this assumption built into the dinner table conversation that at the end of the conversation, you're going to hit a reset button. In a sense, everything is forgiven and forgotten. And tomorrow, you come back to the same dinner table and you do the same thing over again and nothing's changed. There's no progress. Nobody learns anything. And this is parallel maybe to the American culture of the situation comedy, the sitcom on TV, right? There's some conflict, sometimes within a family, sometimes a group of friends. There's a certain number of regular cast members. And then at the end of the episode, you press reset. You can watch the episodes in any order. There's no plot development. Nobody learns. Nobody changes. Now, obviously, I can't say every family is like this. A lot of families are like this. Okay. So every time I sat down to dinner with my father, he was the crazy communist, and I was the rebellious son who couldn't accept my father's religion, who couldn't support communism. I'm basically a pro-democracy, anti-communism kind of person. If you don't know me, And for a lot of people, their situation is their father is a conservative Christian. And every time they sit down to dinner, their father plays the role of the conservative Christian and they play the role of the younger, more left-wing atheist freethinker or something. And they do it at the dinner table again and again and again. And people come onto the internet and engage in these comment sections. And they're fighting, but they're not learning. And I've got to tell you something. It's the most familiar thing to you or to millions of people, if not you, to millions of people. This is the most familiar thing because that's what they grew up with in their own household. But it's completely fake. It's completely unreal. All right. You know what real life is? Real life is you have a conversation with somebody that's 5 minutes long and it changes your life forever. You change that day. You change that minute. I mean this about everything. I mean this about YouTube. I mean this about cheating on your wife. I mean this about ethical decisions. I remember a woman telling the story on YouTube of how she became a vegan. And so she already had a degree in nutritional science, one of those. She was a nutritionist, one of those university degrees related to nutrition and diet. And she had a conversation with a woman. It was the first time she'd ever heard about veganism, but she already knew nutritional science. And she says, oh, I'm sorry, I see you don't eat meat. Like, what's the situation? And this woman just said a few sentences about veganism. She said, oh, well, actually, I'm vegan. And she explains what a vegan diet is. And she then said to the first woman, the one with the great nutritionist, she said, oh, are you vegan also? And she said, I never heard the word before, but I am now. She had already committed to veganism, listening to like one paragraph of text. And so that's real life, homie, Like it can be about things big and small. I once met and talked to a guy. I could tell the whole story, but there's no point. I met and talked to a guy who had really lived in Cuba. It's more than one guy I could be thinking of here. I've known a few different people who lived in communist Cuba, but there's one in particular, one conversation I'm thinking of, and it changed the way I saw and felt about Cuba forever. You meet someone who's been there and lived with that regime, lived with that political system, and I didn't have to think about it. I didn't fight. I don't sit down at the table or go into the comment section, defending Cuba or something. No, but it's like I went into that. I thought I already had a good sense, basically from reading university textbooks. I think I hadn't read or thought about Cuba at all since I was in university. I'd read a certain kind of very dry political science analysis of Cuba. And then you meet someone who's actually lived with it. You go, whoa, I don't know Cuba. Like, whoa, I now how I feel about it and think about it has changed. And I realized the extent to which my university textbooks were actually kind of whitewashing the situation and how horrible it is. So, that's real life. That's real learning. And I just say you can learn things where nobody says a goddamn word to you. You see something happen. You see it in a farmer's field. You see it. For me, it's a great example. But I mean, anyway, sorry, I've witnessed some terrible things in my life. You can see it out of the window of your car as you drive past. You can see something and you learn and you change, and that's it. In one moment, your life changes forever. Okay, that's real life. And what I'm saying to you is what people do in comment sections and what people do around the dinner table with their own family. That's not real life. And that's not learning. It's fighting. And so I have to say, in my subtle way, I'm really trying to oppose the phoniness of that kind of fighting and to instead, I both demonstrate to you and I invite you to participate in a much realer, a much deeper kind of learning. And by the way, not to boast, that's true about my videos about hiding in my room. There's actually something to learn in those videos. There's something really meaningful. It's not just drama or gossip on the internet. I'd say that's true about the videos I made about Anissian. I'm really trying to do something meaningful for myself and others, and that's not compatible with the culture of the comment section. And certainly in American and Canadian culture, I feel it's not compatible even with the culture of the family, which is where most of us learn to talk and most of us learn to fight, Okay, we got some agreement here about the sheer honesty of Daniel hiding in my room. Yep, Ron Sims is saying this is how most families, including mine, was. So you know what I'm talking about. Everyone goes back to the same role the next day. I had one friend, and both of his parents were Protestant, but one of them had converted from Catholicism to Protestantism and still had some Catholic elements of his faith. And every night they fought. Like every night, it was like, the wife felt the husband couldn't be Christian enough. It never went away. They never made progress, She hated it. He still read the Catholic version of the Bible in English. It's not the Protestant version. And they can go to dinner tomorrow and have the same conversation. Do you want to say something, Bit? I'm
wondering where else. We had some discussion.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I started the discussion of Taoist philosophy and how these questions are still meaningful in my life, or how this kind of vocabulary is still meaningful in my life. The other part of the title of this video is talking about being yourself. And I think everyone here will be very leery of our culture of just be yourself, just do your own thing. Very often, it's nothing more than an excuse for laziness. It may be an excuse for intellectual laziness. It may be an excuse for a lack of curiosity, a lack of taking risks, a lack of being daring, because you just have to be yourself. Is to a large extent an excuse to only do things you already know how to do, things you're already comfortable doing, not to expand intellectually or in terms of experience, not to push your limits, not to try to be somebody other than you are, somebody better than you are, more than you are, so on and so forth. That's what it all tends to come down to. right? But this Taoist discourse that I've been quoting to you or paraphrasing to you and discussing with you, it gives a somewhat different inflection to that paradigm. It gives us a somewhat different angle on that hackneyed turn of phrase about being yourself. There's a joke in Shakespeare, to thy own nature be true. But in the intro to this video, I'm raising the question of to what extent do we grow by working with our nature? To what extent do we grow working despite our nature? Now, there is nobody alive who has known me through the different chapters of my life. I don't have any friends who knew me across these multiple chapters. And since I became micro famous on YouTube, since I started having a few thousand views, I've reached out to a few of the people who knew me, like in high school, hoping they would just come on and do like a Skype call with me, do a live stream or do a conversation with me, whether in real life or over Skype or what have you. I've been interested in talking to people who can see how much I've changed. And you're not just hearing it from me that I've changed, but you got someone else saying, dude, you've changed. Dude, I knew you when you were 16, or I knew you were 18, or I knew you when you were 22, or, whatever it is. If there were anyone who knew me from one chapter of my life to the next, to the next, to the next, I think they could really say, look, Eisel, you are someone who tried for so many years to improve by working against your own nature rather than with it. And that was very true of me. So as with the beginning of the video, I'm going to give you one sexy example and one non-sexy example. But, the sexy example, you guys have already guessed from the start of the video. But look, when I was still in high school, basically every course I chose intentionally to take the courses that I would be the worst at, that I had no familiarity with, where I would be out of my comfort zone, that it wasn't what I was good at. So I didn't do, I don't know, whatever you think of my character. I didn't take art courses, what have you. I took like the wood shop course. I took these really boring hands-on courses. I was really trying to challenge myself to grow that way. And this could only last for so many years, but it's still, when you're young, it's a big part of your life. I kept pushing myself to take these courses that I wasn't interested in, that I had no experience with. It's like, oh, well, I've never used a saw in my life. I've never worked with wood in a wood shop in my life. This came up with my girlfriend. I took a course where you learn to do electrical wiring with a fucking soldering iron. My girlfriend was surprised that I know how to use a soldering iron. I do. There was always this sense of pushing myself to do what I was least capable of, had the least, experience with. And indeed, things that were, you can say, contrary to my nature. And it's very easy to look at the period of my life where I was involved in Buddhism and to say this is the same thing on a much grander scale. So that's the sexy part in brief. I mean, guys, I was in training to be a Buddhist monk for a significant amount of time. I was living in celibacy, and I was seriously thinking about living the whole rest of my life in celibacy, which is a significant part of my human nature that I was looking to, discard. Now, there are other things you can talk about discarding there. I mean, many of you today may think of me as, to some extent, somebody who's like a creative writer, a creative artist, a creative intellectual in that sense. And by the way, a political intellectual, right? Well, if you're going into Buddhism in that sense, whether it's as a Buddhist monk or as some kind of lay religious leader and scholar, you're giving up on politics, you're giving up on your own creativity and creative arts. You are embracing orthodoxy, right? And then, I was also embracing humanitarian work. There was more to it than that. It's not going to live in a cave, but it is helping the poor and the homeless and all kinds of other stuff. You know what I'm saying? It is completely balefully true to say of me that for large parts of my life, I was trying to grow. I was trying to become a better person by working against my nature instead of working with it. Now, this is an example that's neither sexy nor non-sexy. This is recent history. How long have I been divorced? 8 years? Something like that? 7 years? Split up with my wife. Something like that. 7.5. Okay. So Melissa says 7.5 years. Okay. So about 7.5 years ago, split up with my ex-wife, start a whole new chapter in my life again. Again, nobody knows me from one chapter to the next. There is nobody alive who can say, Eisel, I knew what you were like when you were in England. I knew what you were like when you were living in France. I know what you were like when you were living in Taiwan. And then I know what you were like when you started living in Canada again on the West Coast. Nobody. There's no continuity of any friends or colleagues. Each period of my life, I had friends. I did. They're different people with each period, right? What did I do when I split up with my ex-wife? I said, okay, I'm going to start a whole new chapter of my life. I'm going to really buckle down and I'm going to really conform. I'm going to give up everything I care about, everything I want to study, everything I want to do with my career, the kind of person I want to be. I'm going to start studying a completely new language, Chinese. I'm going to start a completely new career in academia, playing by their rules and like really submitting to and assimilating myself into a hierarchical system I totally despise, right? Now, in some ways, I've got to tell you, this is a much more radical self-abnegation than becoming a Buddhist monk. This is much more contrary to my nature. Now, what do you mean by nature? We're talking about it in an explicitly Taoist sense here, but I have talked about this many times. You know, no matter how humble or self-effacing I try to be, I walk into a room at the University of Victoria where we're talking about the politics and history of Asia, and it's not on every subject, but it's on a lot of subjects. The professor picks up on the fact that I know more than he does. It's pretty much always a male professor. In one case, a female professor. It's a male-dominated profession, you know, and you get to see how different professors deal with that. And some of them have a meltdown. Some of them, they can't stand to have this challenge to their authority, no matter how genuinely nice, genuinely friendly, genuinely helpful I am in these conversations. You know, so I could now tell a whole bunch of anecdotes, really funny anecdotes about conflicts between me and my professors, right? But there is absolutely a sense in which, even if it's more subtle than the issue of living in celibacy so you can be a scholar of Buddhism or a Buddhist monk, there's absolutely a sense in which someone who knew me my whole life since I was 14 or 16 or something could look at this and say, you're doing it again. You're still the same kid who enrolled in woodshop precisely because you don't like woodshop, because you think you can grow. You think you can become a better person. You think you can challenge yourself in a useful way by doing something that's contrary to your nature. And you're wrong. What you've got to do is work with your nature, right? So, you know, look, I've alluded to it in other videos talking about other contexts, but obviously I've said when I was living in a place like Thailand, enormous numbers of women wanted to have sex with me. And normally I'm just talking about the white women, I'm talking about like women from Germany and Sweden and stuff, women who were there as tourists, right? And I was completely set on this ancient narrow path of virtue, and I never had sex with any of them. And there were Thai women and everything else. And of course, there is an argument someone could make, especially for someone who knew me at 16, who said, someone could say, look, you know, you're a very loving person. You're a very warm person. And you're also an intellectual who really thrives on having people in your life to talk to. It's one reason I talk to a camera. You know, you're not actually a bookish intellectual who can't deal with people face to face. You're someone who wants to have these warm, cooperative, collaborative relationships with people. You should actually be sleeping with these people. You should actually be getting people into your life and having meaningful relationships. And maybe some of them, whatever, sleep with 50 people, maybe 5 of them become your friends for the rest of your life or for the next 5 years. There totally is a reading of how I lived that time of my life. We have to say, look, you were working against your own nature. You were doing this all wrong, right? So, you know, I just say, like on different chapters of my life, there's a different analysis. There's a different, you know, reading for this. But for me now, I'm a mean old man. I'm old and I'm wise and I'm detached, okay? When I just sit in the same room as these fucking professors at University of Victoria, these people with PhDs, when I sit in the same room with professors from Cambridge University, England, and Oxford University, England, it's a different time in my life, I to them, it is so fucking obvious that we are not on the same rank of the food chain, okay? And the idea that I would pay money for the opportunity to sit with them as opposed to them paying to sit and talk to me is just fucking laughable. And even if they haven't thought it through, if they haven't like mentated it all the way through clearly, right? That's also what they're dealing with when they're sitting in that room with me. So just, you know, look, I could really give 100 different examples from different times in my life. But one of them that really struck me, it's a useful example. I went to a university in Thailand. So I have to give a little bit of a story here. I was looking for a university where I could get a PhD, but I was already really an expert in Buddhism. I went to this university in Thailand, went alone. And the university is what is remote in Thailand? Okay. It was a long journey to get to this university, even though it's not really remote, but I had to take a train and go out to this campus, suburban campus. Okay. And then within the university, they actually had two different departments of Buddhism, and they didn't get along. They hated each other. So typical for Buddhism as a religion, typical for Thailand. You can imagine that within Christianity, like there's the Catholic department and the Protestant department that hate each other. But in this case, anyway, not worth telling the whole story as to why there are these two departments. So I'm walking around. I can read Thai to a limited extent. And I'm looking at the signs. I'm like, well, I'm looking for the Department of Buddhism. I'm looking for this professor, and getting all these weird, hostile things. Eventually, I find the professor. So I sit down with them and start talking to the professor. And we have this conversation. And so, again, you guys may not know that much about Buddhism. We're talking about Theravada Buddhism. This is the so-called Southern school of Buddhism. And of course, right from the beginning of the conversation, he's seen some of my work and my essays. I think I probably had samples of my handwritten work too. I used to do that I'd put them down on the table. I'd say, look, this is the level I'm at with the language in terms of my handwriting. So you could see right away, I'm really serious about this, and this is the level I'm at. And we're sitting there and talking, and it's very clear I'm at this very high level with Theravada Buddhism. And also, he and I know some of the same professors. So we're kind of talking about some of those people. Like, oh yeah, you studied with this guy. Oh, I know him. He recommended, we have some, we're within 6 degrees of separation of each other. Some talk like that too. And then there's this very interesting break in the conversation where he says, okay, look, that's great. So you've studied the Southern school. You've studied Theravada Buddhism. You studied this school of philosophy, and I recognize you're an expert in that. And he says, but I have to tell you, you know absolutely nothing about Buddhism, and you're a complete beginner to me. You're a complete beginner compared to me, he says, because you haven't mastered the philosophy of Nagarjuna. And if you study with me, you have to accept that you're starting all over again, like with a blank sheet of paper. Obviously not his idiom, that's my idiom, because you're going to study the philosophy of Nagarjuna. And he says just a few things about the philosophy of Nagarjuna. There's a different school of philosophy in Buddhism. And the things he said are wrong. They're beginner's errors. And so he says this, and then I just say to him, I don't say it in a mean way at all. I say, oh, no, I studied the philosophy of Nagarjuna for 2 years, and I studied with this professor and this PhD student who both read Sanskrit fluently, and they worked on the Sanskrit, and I, read it in English. I was learning Pali, not Sanskrit, but they're close to it. And I start saying, oh no, what you just said about Nagarjuna, that's a common misconception based on this. And I can name in Sanskrit during this, I'm naming the works of Nagarjuna and that I've read them and who I read them with. And I'm demonstrating that I'm on a higher level of knowledge of Nagarjuna. I'm on a higher level of knowledge of this thing he's claiming. And he started trembling visibly, and he stood up, and I guess you could say he nodded his head, but it was more like his head was kind of shaking, and he walked away silently. He was humiliated and fucked up, and I never heard from him again. He never replied to an email again. And then I saw him. I was in the same room with him once before. And there was this other professor there. I'm not going to tell this whole story, but there was another professor who had like glommed onto me and was like saying I'm a genius or I'm a great talent or something. I could tell that whole story. That's another interesting story. But I remember this first professor I've described, the guy who tried to one-up me with the philosophy of Nagarjuna. I remember he just looked at the two of us and he stood there really like afraid. And again, just walked away. And the professor I was with, he was like, oh, wow, that's weird. He's not normally that afraid of me. And I was like, no, it's me he's afraid of. So anyway, sorry. I'm sorry if this is a long digression, but I feel if I don't give some examples like that, you guys might think this is delusional or something. You might think that this is just a feeling I have when I'm in the room with these professors. But Melissa has seen this recently. We sat down and had a 2-hour conversation with a professor who is more than 50 years old and has a PhD. And I sat and talked to him for 2 hours. And it's not the fact that I'm sorry. So if this is me and this is him, it's not that I'm struggling to come up to his level. It's that I'm struggling to come down to his level. I'm speaking down to him and I'm explaining things to him. It's like I'm talking to a teenager. And of course, he's used to being in a classroom where he talks to teenagers. I mean, after the conversation, I pointed that to him. I was like, look, there were so many points where I had to break something down and explain to him. It's like he's my student. And we were talking within his field of expertise, not mine, and he's making all kinds of errors that maybe a teenager shouldn't be embarrassed to make, but that a grown man with a PhD should be embarrassed to make. He's making very elemental errors of fact and reasoning, So anyway, so this is a real part of my life. And by the way, this comes back to the guy who said at the beginning that this stuff comes off as narcissism. It's a lamentation, bro. It's sad. Want to say something?
I was going to say you were fighting against your nature in some ways.
Yes.
Accepted.
Yeah, I think so. So let's talk about Daniel. What is in his nature? What does he have to share with the world? Now, I have never had sex with a prostitute. Never. I can boldly say I never have, and I assume I never will. Life is full of surprises. What can I tell you? Things might change. Okay? And I'll tell you something also. I feel that is not in my nature. Like that's contrary to my nature. Okay? This guy is completely shameless about sleeping with prostitutes and talking about it on the internet. And by the way, he also does talk about the ways in which it's kind of gross or kind of disturbing. I have heard him talk about he doesn't just boast about it or something. He talks about the ways in which it's kind of psychologically wearying or disturbing. Okay. So dude, you're talking about deleting all your past videos and going over to this squeaky clean version of YouTube content. You say you're going to do a walking tour of Osaka or whatever the attraction is in Japan. Dude, you are the guy who can interview the prostitutes and make really honest videos talking about prostitution in Japan. And I never could. Like, I can't do that, right? Like, in this respect, in terms of this, like, brutally honest, slightly humiliating side of human nature, like, dude, and I'm telling you straight, like, dude, prostitutes are people too. I do not dehumanize prostitutes at all. I think they are normal people who chose to become a prostitute, and then there are different consequences in their life. I am not talking about dehumanizing or caricaturing prostitutes at all. Like, I have a somewhat feminist perspective on that, right? But like, even if I tried to do that, if I tried to do those interviews, those women would feel like I'm judging them. And I would be in the position of saying to them what I just said to you. I've never slept with a prostitute once. I feel like it's contrary to my nature. That would be unnatural or immoral for me. That's how I feel. Like, again, I'm not a member of a religion. I don't believe it's a supernatural, transcendental fact. But I've been surrounded by prostitution in countries like Thailand and France. Plenty of prostitution in France. I feel like this is something that for me would be evil. Let's be blunt, right? Okay, so I can't, like, there's really like a visceral sense in which I can't be the one to do that interview, not even if I have the best of intentions, not if I say to the person, look, I have a degree in political science and a social science research basis. I want to interview you and share this with YouTube or share this with the world. I want to tell the story of what life is like here for you. Okay, but dude, you can do that effortlessly. And you can do that. You can interview the women you've slept with. You can build up trust with them by actually sleeping with them. And you can do videos talking about that from the client's perspective and from the woman's perspective and from a political perspective, right? Like, the point is, even if I look down on like some aspects, or frankly, all aspects of who this guy is and how he lives his life, right? I can still see that, like, as an artist and as a YouTuber, he has something really valuable to contribute. And he can do that by working with his nature, not against it, not by abnegating and concealing and apologizing for who he is and how he feels, but by pressing further on that same path of confrontational honesty that made him a success in the first place. Being honest about who he is, being honest about what he wants, being honest about what he's willing and unwilling to do to get it, right? But then moving beyond just a self-pitying self-examination to press out, to examine the world around you, tell other people's stories, whether it's literally the prostitutes you sleep with or whatever, tell other people's stories, talk about their perspective. Don't just analyze yourself, analyze the society you're a part of, analyze your political surroundings, even if that is totally just from the shallow perspective of a guy who cares about nothing but getting laid on Tinder. I think that's a window into society and politics also, right? Well, what if it's a window into, he's talked about also sleeping with single moms. Talk about divorce and the plight of, single mothers in Japan. I know I've read a little bit about that. Women who've been married and divorced and are raising a kid, they're in this very tough position, and it's very hard for them to find a new husband and their social status and so on and so forth. There are so many issues, like even put it this way, issues that are really shallow that he could deal with in a rigorously honest way that is working with his nature, not against it, that could be so valuable. And he thinks he can be something more. He thinks he can be someone more. He thinks he can be a better person by abnegating, by deleting his own nature. And he's wrong. He'll only be less. Like, if he tries to give up being this honest, libidinous, what other polite Latin word can I use? Epicurean character. This overly honest, libidinous Epicurean character. It's not going to be by, the crane trying to imitate the sparrow. It's not going to be by the sparrow trying to imitate the crane. You have to embrace your nature and not regard it as a limit to what you can be, not regard it as a stereotype you have to live within. You have to say, these are the characteristics you can work with, and then working with them, see how you can grow. You gonna say? Jump in.
I do want to say something else. So it would be one thing, some people who have made the commitment to putting porn online of themselves.
Yes.
That they would regret that.
Yes.
And retract it and say, go on tours, speaking tours, saying that they regret going into porn. It would be the one thing if that was what he was doing, but he's not ashamed of it. So why doesn't he just capitalize? Continue doing that and own it.
I agree. So look, in some ways that's the saddest thing of all, right? Okay, so look, I'll give you contrast too. So Mango in the audience, Mango Mange says, quote, but his nature is introverted. No, it's not. Okay, this guy uploads hardcore porn of himself to OnlyFans. He's not introverted. He's not shy. He's not. He's lazy. He's a video game addict. You know what I'm saying? Great question. Michael asks, have you ever corresponded directly with Hiding in My Room with Daniel? I wrote to him before this video was posted to let him know that this video would be online, and hopefully sooner or later he clicks on the link. He might or might not be asleep right now in terms of the British time zone. I have sent him a few messages on Instagram that he has never replied to, which is fine. I'm sure he gets a lot of messages, and I think he's only interested in messages that come from good-looking women. So, this is, I've chosen not to catfish him in this respect. But no, he is someone who already took the plunge. He is someone who already, who already committed to doing hardcore porn. To sharing that with the world. So I feel like what he thinks the path forward is to try to delete and conceal and pretend to be ashamed of all the characteristics that make him distinctively him. And again, this is contrasted to being yourself.
In order to find a woman.
Yes. Yes. Preach.
If you want to be with somebody, shouldn't you be with somebody that you can be honest with? And if you aren't ashamed of it, find somebody who's also not ashamed to do porn, not ashamed to be honest.
Right. So you're right. So that's a huge aspect of it I didn't mention at all in this video. Okay. So I didn't say this. What is motivating him to delete his YouTube channel? What is motivating him to try to conceal who he really is and start making completely phony YouTube content or delete his web presence entirely? His answer is that he is terrified of being alone, that what he really wants is a wife or girlfriend. And it's interesting, it's now singular. He apparently doesn't want to have many sexual, I don't know if I believe him. I'm just saying I've heard him talk a lot about the fact that he felt he would never be happy with one sexual partner. And if so, be honest with yourself and be honest with your girlfriend or wife about that. Don't lie to yourself and don't lie to her. If you are not a one-woman man, if you are not a guy who's going to be happy with just having sex with one woman for the rest of your life, don't lie about it now and tell the truth about it later. Tell the truth up front. So yeah, however, I do think that what I said earlier is at least as true and is maybe more true when I just talked about the extent to which he has suffered and still is suffering, because you see that a lot. He is suffering because people ridicule him about his ex-wife and his divorce. There's a lot of harassment. There's a lot of denunciation. He feels like this has brought a lot of negative things in his life, which it obviously has. Yeah, James showed up late. It's a hell of a video, James. You go back. It's a roller coaster. It has highs and lows. It really does. It really does. It's a whole hour and a half long movie. We're gonna tell you. No credits at the end. No intro. No outro. Just real talk. Okay, but like instead of him having the confidence, this comes back to what I said about a meaningful life before too, even though we're talking about a pretty meaningless life. Oh, someone wants me to talk about the Canadian election. Good luck. You don't pay me enough. You don't pay me enough to denigrate myself that way, Henry. You want me to talk about the Canadian election. Fuck you. All right. So, he's in this situation where he feels women reject him. Women won't date him. These are women who are shy, conflicted about their sexuality. They're women who are afraid of appearing on YouTube. They're women who are understandably afraid of being with a man who does hardcore porn on OnlyFans, right? Okay, so one option, what he is presuming is the only option, is for him to try to lie and obfuscate and abnegate and conceal who he really is. But the other option is for him to press further, right? Is to seek out personal growth that is in accordance with his nature and not contrary to it, right? Like another option is for him to try to include in his life and spend time with precisely people who, accept his making hardcore pornography, whether that's because they make hardcore pornography themselves or they may be unconventional intellectuals. Like, to give an example, I'm sure in Japan there probably are feminists who just out of a commitment to kind of feminist philosophy are sex positive and pro pornography and would be happy to be friends with someone like that, would share their life with a guy who does hardcore porn and would regard it as something liberating and positive for him and for society, but they themselves don't do porn. They don't even watch porn. So there are people who, whether philosophically or just from their own life experience, are really accepting of that. And instead he's trying to put himself in this box where, he thinks he's trying to be more, but he's really trying to be less. You and I said this to each other when we watched his video. He's trying to be a nobody, and it's so ironic because if you look at this guy's career, and I know it because he was so honest about it on YouTube, dude, every single woman who slept with you did so because you were a somebody, not because you were a nobody. And obviously, whether it's for the sake of your love life or for your life as a creative artist or an intellectual or just as a man, as a human being on earth, obviously you need to press further with being a somebody and not try to make yourself into this anonymized non-entity, being a nobody. But even before he was on YouTube, before he had YouTube fame, right? He went to Japan in a very particular role as a half white, half Asian English teacher, as an English as a second language teacher. He showed up and he worked very hard as a student of the Japanese language. He learned to speak Japanese as a foreigner, so on and so forth. So I know it may not be as obvious as being a famous YouTuber and having women sleep with you, but no, you were already a somebody. You arrived in Japan with a mission and an identity and a story, and you weren't like other guys. Like, you realize for Japanese women, 99.9% of their options are Japanese men. And you were someone who was saying, without saying a word, just being yourself, you were someone who was showing up saying that you're really different from other guys. You're certainly a very unconventional man. We've learned over the years of your uploading just how unconventional you are, morally, intellectually, and otherwise. You're not an average Japanese guy. You're not an average British guy. You're a very unusual guy with your own character, your own sense of mission and so on. So yeah, James asked a great question. James says, did I miss the Daoism part? James, the whole video is the Daoism part. You may not realize it, but we are talking about Taoist philosophy right now because we're talking about what it means to be yourself and do your own thing and act in accordance with your own nature. This is a core element of Taoist philosophy, however translatable or untranslatable it may be. So, babe, do you have a comment on that? I mean, I can say something challenging. Why don't you jump in now? Then I'll ask you a question.
No,
Okay.
I think it's a fantasy that
yes.
you can erase your past, find somebody that wants an anonymous guy, like you said, a nobody, and that you'd find some sense of contentedness in this just by having a partner and being, like you say, a one-woman man. That's what I have to say. I think it's a fantasy, and some people who are famous have this fantasy of being a nobody. They want to anonymize themselves again. They want to know what it's like from the other side again.
Especially when their fame has brought them a lot of suffering too. Which I sympathize with, as I said earlier. So when Melissa and I were first falling in love with each other, she read an article I wrote, and I said to her, because she'd seen a lot of my YouTube videos. I said to her, well, look, if you've read this article and that's the man you want to be with, then we should really get together and make this happen, because that's who I really am. Like that article shows you who I really am. Pardon me. Because, if you're meeting someone over the internet, there's a concern, like, is it really me you're interested in, or is it some illusion or some delusion? Is it something you assume about me or imagine about me? Is it some fantasy you have about me? And after she read this article, and she just gave me a very short comment, I was like, okay, well, if that's the man you want to be with, is the man who wrote that article, then, buy the airplane ticket and come over. Let's figure out the airplane tickets. Because, that's who I really am. Now, okay, so in case you don't know what the article is about, it's about like the history of Chinese politics and the war that took place between Japan and Russia and the history of communism. It's not an autobiographical essay. It's not me talking about my feelings or my childhood or something. It's an essay dealing with the history and politics of Asia. Okay. But this dude, back when he was making really honest YouTube content, he could say the same thing to any woman, right? And that's what you should aspire to do again. Whether you're going to be alone, whether you're going to have one monogamous partner, or whether you're going to sleep with a whole bunch of different women, which might include prostitutes, it might include fans, groupies, might include, it's not inconceivable that this guy could have a kind of multiple partner life. And it might include some women who have a kind, they appreciate you for what you are, but they don't really want to raise kids with you. You know what I mean? Women who have a kind of medium commitment, long-term relationship with you, where they're not your wife, but they're someone who's in your life and involved with your life positive way. Now, okay, here's the thing. Melissa is saying it's a fantasy to think that you can change and just become another person. I know I'm going to say, and it's a fantasy to say you can delete your past, right? Okay, but you were saying it's a fantasy to delete your past in order to be another person. I think that's a fair summation of what you said. Because it wasn't deleting your past. It was deleting your past in order to become another person. Okay, so that's partly true. But the other thing that's true is that who you are really does change, whether you want it to change or not, right? And I do actually sympathize with him wanting to delete old videos when he looks at those old videos and he sees they're really honest, but they're honest about who I was. That's who I was back then. And this is who I am now. I've changed so much. I'm so different. That I can relate to. And again, nobody's known me through multiple chapters, but of course I've changed. And even if I didn't want to change, I've changed, right? So I'm just saying, I would not say to this dude, look, you should always live up to your old YouTube videos where you were honest. And say to women, hey, if you've watched my old YouTube videos and you have a crush on that guy, or you're interested in the guy in the YouTube video, well, that's who I really am. So we should meet up. No, I get that. But what he should do is, in his art, in his authorship, what he should aspire to do now, what he should aspire to do today, is to create videos where he can really say, this is who I really am. And if someone gets a crush on this guy in this video, if someone relates to this, someone wants to meet this guy, or they're just interested, they're just curious, They just think this is an interesting guy. They may not fall in love with you right away. Where you can say, in my art, in my filmmaking, in my essay writing, you are seeing who I really am in a really meaningful and profound way. Even if it's about something shallow, where you're at that level of commitment. You know what I mean? So if you like what you see, and then you send me an email, I can say, well, we really should meet up. And that's the way for you to not be alone. It's not through concealing who you are, and then they only find out later you're this asshole who sleeps with prostitutes. No, own it. Share who you are, and right. Don't lie about it now and then tell the truth about it later.
Right. And what kind of woman is going to have a crush on somebody who says, well, I'm deleting all my past videos that make me look bad in order to find a partner?
Right.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Right. Well, it's a woman you're going to deceive.
Yeah. And it's a relationship based on deception.
Yes. But I think it's also your opinion of yourself is increasingly based on deception. Yeah. Right. That's it. You're lying to yourself about who you really are. So Sam Walsh says, sympathetic comment from Sam. Sam says, quote, from what little I've seen of him, you can see plenty of them on my own channel. I have a playlist of videos. There's the Hiding in My Room playlist, by the way. You can just search for HIMR on the playlist page. Sam says, quote, from what little I've seen of him, he's very sad and isolated, but nevertheless is resistant to real change and instead opts for escapism through his YouTube videos, video games, etc. Yes, correct. Nacho says, so babe, can you just turn on that light for me? Let's just have a slight lighting change. Nacho says, quote, so do you regret doing these things in your own life that went against your own nature? Yeah, thanks, babe. So did you hear that question, babe?
Yeah. So
look, Nacho, the answer to that question you have to think of as like two lines on a chart, and the question is, how much more could I have developed and progressed as a person? In what ways could I be a better person today if I had worked with my nature instead of against it? Right? That's really the question. Now, the thing is, so if you haven't been watching this video from the start, we are talking about a very Taoist sense of nature and of one's own nature. So obviously, if you are a 10-year-old kid and all you know is playing video games and watching movies and eating hot dogs, this is your life as a 10-year-old, right? That's what you like to do, and that's how you know how to enjoy your life. Many people, they go from 10 years old to 20 years old. At 20 years old, they still say, well, look, this is who I am. I've just got to be myself. I've just got to sit around in my pajamas and play video games and eat hot dogs and watch movies or whatever. And there are people who stay on that. So that is not the sense in which we mean nature here. But yeah, I was someone who challenged myself to grow by doing things contrary to my own nature, obviously including living in celibacy for long periods of time. And the question is, how much more could I have developed, by working with my nature instead of against it. So, also, obviously this huge sense is, what if I had really remained a creative artist consistently in any medium or all? What if I'd continued with creative writing? But what it doesn't matter. Instead of trying again and again to force myself into various forms of really being a non-creative intellectual, it's very contrary to my nature. And again, also trying in some ways to live a life that was non-political. You might think I'm trying to force myself into politics. In a lot of ways, I'm trying to force myself out of politics. In each chapter of my life, it's a different story. It's different in Toronto than it is in Thailand. But sure. So there are questions of where I could be at today. But as you get the sense, I'm not saying it's all bad. Obviously, I've had a wonderful life, and I'm very happy with the person I am now. But sure, fundamentally, it's completely tragic and ridiculous to have studied as many languages as I've studied, and to have dissipated what energy and talent and genius you have in life, to have dissipated it into, so many different fields and so much different experience. Now, reciprocal with that is, of course, I meet people who've lived and worked. I meet people who are computer programmers, and all they've ever done is sit and work on computer programming. Well, I know what it's like to stand in a field of sesame flowers in bloom. I know what it's like to really be involved in farming in a third world tropical country and to really care about farming. I'm not going to tell you that's who I am. It's not It's not who I, what I mean? It's not some part of my identity, but I've had a lot of experiences like that are every bit as far removed from, my nature, they're really challenging me, really, really strange, challenging experiences. And there's some sense in which I benefit from that and carry that with me. And I do think there's a sense in which other people can never replicate that through tourism. Like if you are a computer programmer and you go on vacation in Laos and Cambodia and you see the same field of sesame flowers in bloom, or you go and see the same starving people and you hand them sacks of rice. I wasn't frequent, but I did literally do that. I did literally hand out sacks of rice that had a United Nations logo on the sack to starving people. If you do that as a vacation, you will never know the agony and you will never experience it with the intensity and depth and intellectual and emotional involvement I had, precisely because I was trying to do this for the rest of my life. Like I was trying to do this as a career. I wasn't trying to learn enough Laotian to get through my vacation. I was studying the Lao language, the assumption that I was going to speak this when I was 80 years old, when I was an old man. I was working so hard. I was working on Pali and Buddhism and history and politics. Like, the level of commitment and the level of engagement and what all those things meant to me, the vividness of that comes from the total commitment to it. And by the way, really, really short story, really, really funny story to me. I met a Vietnam War veteran. I had many conversations with these were old men at that time already. They were old men with gray hair who had fought in the Vietnam War, and now they were coming back as tourists to travel around that part of the world, see what had become of it since the war ended. Anyway, I had this long conversation with a Vietnam War veteran, and interesting guy. And he did something like intelligence work. He talked to me a little bit. He was not a normal soldier. I could pin down a little bit more precise what kind of work he did, but there's probably no point. But he was not just in the pulling triggers business in the war. We had this long conversation about different things in politics and history. And then at the end of the conversation, it was when we had paid the bill. He said to me, no context, the following. He said, "You know what you have to do to make your life work out here?" He said, "Pay the rent on an apartment or a condominium or a whole house back in California, like back in the United States where you're from." I'm actually Canadian, but he assumes that's California, and make sure, you've paid all the bills. So the lights are running, the air conditioning's running. So there's a car in the driveway. So everything's there. So that the minute you get pissed off, the minute you lose your patience with life out here in Cambodia, in Laos, these places, that you can just get on an airplane, go home, and your bed is waiting for you. Your whole home is waiting for you. All the conferences are ready for you. You can just go back. And at any moment, you can do it. And I think his point was you can do this repeatedly. You can then fly back again. Anytime you get pissed off. And, I remember sitting there and saying to him, everything I own in this world fits in one backpack. Back in Canada or back in the United States, I own nothing. When I go back, there is nothing waiting for me, and there's nobody waiting for me, which was true. I had no friends back in Canada. I was not on speaking terms with any of my relatives. I have no family. Nobody's going to meet me at the airport. No, my dude. This is the only life I have, right? So, I went through those experiences with this level of absolute commitment, absolute engagement, And by the way, I think you can feel this, right now with this YouTube video. That's how I do YouTube also. It's with this much higher level of commitment. It's also why I get upset answering some of these questions to the audience and stuff. This isn't an act. This is who I really am. Or even if it is an act, the act is who I really am. I mean, I'm not sure those are separable. People are, to some extent, their actions, and our actions become us, and we become our actions. But that this is who I really am, and I do this also with this very, very high level of engagement and commitment. So yeah, I think that's probably a good place to stop, because I think that does also state what I feel I have in common with him, or the kind of kinship I have with him is precisely that he brings to it, or in his best videos brought to it, that same over-the-top, unbelievable level of honesty, where anyone could look at those videos and say, wow, that's who he really is. So look, you can change. You can. And who you were does not define who you are or who you will be. You really can fundamentally change. And with this dude, the most obvious example is you can quit video games today, forever. And who you are would change in ways you can't even imagine. Another one, you can quit coffee. I have experience with this. I've quit coffee many times. I know he drinks coffee every day because he shows it on camera all the time. You do not know how much you would change your character, your behavior, your intellectual and emotional, kind of range. You could quit video games. You could quit coffee. You can change. However, it is his honesty that made him a somebody. And of course, when you're being honest about being a terrible person, it's very hard to perceive honesty as a virtue. But it is. It is a virtue. And I've already conceded this earlier in the video, but I can say it again briefly and I can go further. I think that he is capable of being honest about things and being a filmmaker, making videos about things that I could never be honest about and that I could never make films about. You know what I mean? And I think that a lot of those topics, they matter to a lot of people more than the things I'm passionate about, the things I want to make films about, and the things I want to talk about honestly in videos, But how, so you can change, you can, but the art of learning and developing and personal growth is not to be less. It's to be more. And I said this before, but I'll say it again. It has a different meaning for you now in this context. If you're going to be a YouTuber, you've got to be willing to get your heart broken and come back again and again and again. Get your heart broken, you get disappointed, say, okay, that was bad, and now I'm going to come on camera and I'm going to do it again. And by the way, I know, like Melissa's filmmaking, it may seem relatively dry and academic. I mean, compared to my videos, it doesn't have this kind of anguished personal quality. But it's a heartbreaking process for Melissa also. She puts a lot into these videos. Sometimes she works for a huge number of hours on a draft that never gets uploaded on a version of a video and goes back and does it all over again. Back to the drawing board, as they say. There's a lot of anguish and a lot of suffering. But your model of personal growth, the way in which you're going to improve as a person, it can't be through concealment. Right? It can't be from concealing from others who you really are or what you desire, what you don't, right? It can't be through self-abnegation. It can't be through subtraction. It can't be through being less, right? You have to find a way to grow that's in keeping with your nature, not in a state of denial of it, not acting against it, right? You have to find a way to grow and be more than you are, be a better person than you are, but where you're building on and growing out of, the person that you were. Okay, I know exactly what I want to say next. Let's just glance at your comments for a second, guys. If you guys want to say something. You want to say something? Okay. Yeah. I have a lot to say. I had a friend, and he had been in and out of mental institutions, in and out of insane asylums, frankly. And he had also been in and out of jail. So he had both been institutionalized in terms of going to psychiatric institutions and prison. And you can imagine he had a very strange view of sexual relations with women. One of the love affairs that I think really shaped him in life, he had a love affair inside one of the mental institutions with a woman his own age, but who was there getting psychiatric treatment also, and so on. So whereas a lot of people, their first sexual experiences are in university or something, this was he had a very different, path of developing those perceptions and so on. And, I remember, so this is the kind of conversation. He was an intelligent guy, but deeply troubled and really unfamiliar with a lot of the kind of unspoken rules and secret philosophy of love and relations in our culture. And I said to him, it's the simplest thing, but it's really deep and it's really important. I said to him, what does it mean to you to want to be loved by a good woman? What does good mean in that sentence? So the whole vocabulary of this was totally unfamiliar. Right? I said, look, this is the reality of who you are. And not every man is like this. Okay? There are men who will take whatever they can get and will get whatever they can take. Not you. You don't go to nightclubs. You don't go to bars. You don't want to sleep with any woman you can get. You don't want to sleep with the most attractive woman you get. You don't want to sleep with prostitutes. You don't want this. You don't want that. And you may not even have thought about that. You may not even thought about all the people you're rejecting all the time, right? You have a very fixed notion of what is morally good in a woman that you haven't even examined. Like he literally had never thought about it yet. And those are the only women you pursue, because it's only when you're with those women that you're going to feel good about yourself. If you sleep with a prostitute, this particular guy, not all men, this particular guy, if you pay a prostitute to have sex with you, you feel like shit. And this particular guy, I could say, I knew some of his prejudices. If he slept with a girl he regarded as very stupid and unsophisticated, who had, look, let's just leave it at that. But I know this particular guy's prejudices. But if he slept with someone who was an uneducated bumpkin or something, someone with just no sophistication, whom he somehow, kind of talked into having sex with them or swiped above seated, you would have contempt for yourself, right? You have a notion of what's good. And it's not just a judgment on these women. It's a judgment on yourself. It's a judgment on who you want to be and how you want to be loved, to validate that opinion of yourself, the sense of who you ought to be. Now, a lot of you in this audience, thanks, Griff. Thanks for taking the time. We had some people early in the live stream who didn't appreciate the discussion, so it's nice to hear some people get that. Anyway, thanks, Griff. I think a lot of people in this audience, you already know that. Like probably what I'm saying to you, even if you've never talked about it with a friend or you've never looked in the mirror and said that, probably a lot of you are like, oh yeah, I guess I've always known that. Maybe since you were 14 years old or something. You're like, you know what? That's true. The reason why I don't want to sleep with someone who I think is a scumbag is because I don't want to feel like I'm a scumbag, and I don't want to feel like I'm a scumbag lover, and I don't want to feel like only scumbags can appreciate me because of my scumbagness. You want to be with someone who has redeeming qualities and who recognizes redeeming qualities in yourself, and there's a kind of, validation and aspiration built into that loving relationship. Okay, so I get it. This guy has gotten to a point in his personal development, intellectual, emotional, and ethical development, where he looks back at who he was just a few years ago, and he feels contempt for who that man is. And he looks at the women who are willing to fuck that guy with that reputation on the internet. And he used to chase them. He used to have no druthers. He wanted to sleep with every groupie he could get. Every girl who looked at his YouTube videos and saw he was famous and got in touch with him on Instagram and was willing to, even when he was married, he wanted to cheat on his wife with any halfway decent looking female who would meet up with him, which in most cases was women who were responding to his fame. But, to give credit, some of these women, they may have liked what they saw in the video. They might have really been responding to who he was and his honesty and, and now he looks back at the man he was, and he looks at the women he was with, and he sees that the man he was a scumbag, and that the women he was with right? They're only validating, this ethical, emotional, and intellectual identity he used to have. And it's not the identity he has now, or it's not the identity he wants to have in the future. He feels that he wants to be with precisely the kind of woman who would reject what they see on his YouTube channel, what they see in his YouTube videos in the past. And why does he want that? It's not just to have sex, right? If it's just sex, it could be a prostitute, it could be a woman you meet in a nightclub, it could be anyone, right? It's not just sex. It's because of who he is and the tension between who he was and who he wants to be. So he wants a woman to validate, his aspiration to be a better man. And the problem is he's going about it exactly the wrong way. He's going about it by deleting everything positive and distinctive about himself instead of building on it, instead of working with his nature to be more, to be better, right? Instead of being a somebody, he's trying to be a nobody. He's trying to retreat into the shadows. He's trying to be an inoffensive, shy non-entity who has nothing positive to offer the world. What it's not like he's making up a story that he's not making up a false identity that he's a medical doctor and did something wonderful with his life in these years, right? What he did accomplish was in some ways wonderful and in some ways terrible, in some ways awful, right? And he's just trying to delete that so he can be this nondescript non-entity. Because if he thinks if he can get back to this neutral 0 point of anonymity, of indistinctness, of just being a man, any man, rather than a particular man with a particular character and particular accomplishments and a particular voice and particular advantages, a particular kind of creative artist, right? That's the way that he can be loved by the kind of woman who will make him feel good about himself, that will make him feel that he's a good person. All right. That is my reading ultimately of the tragedy of Daniel, of hiding my room. And here's the saddest part of all. He's probably going to do it, and it's probably going to work. Okay. If you see this video, Daniel, I want you to visualize two paths that are branching out in front of you, right? One of them is you go back to Japan and you embrace who you really are. And you get out there and you sleep with prostitutes and you don't conceal who you are. And you say to them really honestly and openly that, yeah, you're also a sex worker. You do hardcore porn on OnlyFans. And you say, yeah, you have a YouTube channel where you talk about this life and you talk about your own life and you're really honest, and that you were somewhat notorious, on YouTube for this or that in the past. You can say whatever. And you can talk to those prostitutes and talk to them and say, yeah, I want to do a video talking about the history of this neighborhood. And probably like every neighborhood in Japan probably was destroyed in World War II and then it was rebuilt, and, a history of the local mafia crime families there. That's the typical, prostitution area in Japan or something. There will be interest, and you can talk to her about that. And then once you got some mutual trust, you say, you know what? I'd like to make a YouTube video, and you don't want to show her face. I want to make a YouTube video and we just show your hands full, and let's talk about your life. Let's not just make the analysis of me. And you know what, bro? Like there's this path in front of you where, and again, I think ultimately it's political. Ultimately, what's the point, right? The point isn't just self-indulgence. The point is to really learn something about human nature and politics and how we can have a better society in future. And, there's a lot to learn. Right? There really is. I can see so much positive that comes out of that. And it's to humanize the sex workers and put a human face on these political issues and consequences, and put a human face on the Yakuza, put a human face on gangsters. They're human beings too, whatever you're going to do. There's one path in front of you where you really work with your nature, right? And then the other path is the one you've described yourself in your recent YouTube videos, which is that you go back to Japan, you delete your YouTube videos. Either you delete the whole channel or you delete 90% of them. You start using a different name, you grow a beard. Like this is his plan, is to grow a beard to look different. You change your appearance. I don't know, maybe you dye your hair blonde, right? You start using a different name, different hairstyle, different beard, and you get a Tinder profile where you're just some guy. You're just nobody. And then you expect some Japanese woman who's also a nobody to love you because what you have in common is your own nothingness. Okay, Daniel, I think if you've seen this video, you know what the right direction for you to take is. Okay, and it's the direction that's ultimately creative rather than destructive, because there is something destructive when you act against your own nature. As sad and strange as this may sound, you'll be killing someone, Daniel. Okay, because you will be destroying the man who you truly are.